On today's show, we have our guest, David Gould. And in this episode, we ask the question, why would God bestow upon humans the gift of free will? If God wanted morality and God wanted harmony, why not create humans to be automatons or robots, only capable of good? Or perhaps a limited free will where it can only do good? Why do human beings possess the ability for good and evil?
I don't know a lot about automatons or a lot about robots, but one thing I'm confident in is that they are mechanical and electrical,
Mhm.
and that they do not have human relationships. God created human beings not because he wanted human beings to be something or to behave in a particular way. In the Christian tradition, God creates human beings out of love and for love. There is no love without free will. There is no love without free will. There is only oppression or some kind of domination. So, the God of the Christian tradition, the God of the Bible, and we see this narrative in Genesis, and we see it lived out most fully, according to our tradition, in the life and teaching of Jesus Christ. The human being is created for relationship. The human being is created for communion. So the part of your friend's question and what you have raised here for us is also this matter of what constitutes evil. According to Maximus the Confessor, the great teacher in our tradition, in his extraordinary book on the difficulties in scriptures, where he's responding to a bunch of questions that the abbot Thalassius has and asks him to address. He begins that book by a reflection on the definition of evil. And he points out that evil has no substance. Evil has no origin. Evil was not created. Evil has no destiny. What's he getting at? He's really getting at something which is quite different from many of the great religious traditions of the world. Many of those traditions really see the world as a combat zone. They see it as a struggle between good and evil, but not in the Christian tradition. In the Christian tradition, and Maximus is the best at this, at speaking to us about this. Maximus reflects on how we are created by God out of love, that we are created with desires. These desires are all good. These desires are part of our nature, and they are profoundly good. The desire to live, the desire to be nurtured, the desire to love, the desire to enter into communion with the life of the world, and of course with God. So, if God, when you think of human beings as being created by a deity that wants moral perfection, then you're looking at a different kind of theology, a different kind of mythology. The creation of the human being, the creation of the human nature, is for communion. So the free will we have is our capacity to say yes, our capacity to not turn away, our capacity to draw near to the God of all creation and to draw near to our neighbor as ourself. So Christianity is not a dualism. It's not about the struggle between good and evil. So what then is evil? Well, Maximus talks about what we normally think of as evil as the disorders of our passions, the disorders of our desires. So when our desire is not orienting us towards the creator of all, the lover of the world, who longs only for communion, when we step out of that and turn our desire into selfishness, into something we want, into an appetite, that's evil. That's where evil comes from. So evil has no metaphysical reality. It was not created by God. It is a disorder of a very good desire, which is natural to human beings, and which, when we do not function in terms of our ego, when we do not turn natural desires into appetites, when we do not recreate the world in our own image, which is what it means to turn the world into your appetites. But when we are present to creation as it is, to God as he is, to our neighbor as our neighbor is, when we are present seeking only communion, loving communion, then the human being is whole. It's called holiness. And in holiness, there, of course, is no evil. So the important thing, I think, to remember here is that the gift of our liberty, the gift of our freedom, is a gift to say yes to life, to say yes to the lover of the world, and to say yes to the image of God in our own neighbor. Indeed, in the stranger. Indeed, even in our enemy. And to respond as Jesus Christ responds, out of loving communion with the soul deepest of human desires, which is to heal and bless the world as we encounter it.
Now, perhaps I have a bit of a pagan concept in my theology, but we were discussing earlier, is God a force of good? And this was another question my friend had. Or how do we know God is more than just a force that acts on the world? How do we know he's a benevolent force? Or is this a pagan concept that many of us have?
Mm-hmm. When we look at much of the religious imagination of the human family, and we look at the various kinds of deities that human beings speak about, those deities are largely deities that mimic human behavior.
In the ancient pagan pantheons.
Yes, yeah, they mimic human behavior. So they're obviously a kind of projection of what particular human beings, what particular cultures, what particular tribes understand to be sacred. You have to remember that the sacred is not good, the sacred is powerful, and it can be good and bad, good and evil. The Christian tradition is so distinct from this, in that at the center of the Christian revelation is that God has poured himself into the human nature. God has become man and dwells among us. The incarnation, Jesus of Nazareth, who then lives, teaches, acts, And as we know from the biblical narrative, ends up hung on a cross as a blasphemer, as someone who has stepped out of the moral order of both Rome and of his, seen by many, of his own religious community. God is not powerful in that sense. God is the God of love and the God of weakness, because God in that sense is calling us to a relationship of love and affection, not one of power or even of goodness. You know, goodness and holiness aren't the same thing. So at the very center of the Christian tradition, this is why at the center of the Christian tradition is not a particular moral paradigm. At the center of the Christian tradition is forgiveness and the restoration of the human nature, the restoration of our relationship to God, to the mystery of our own being, and to the mystery of the being of others in the world. So our understanding of the Holy One, blessed be He, is deeply relational. And it is a relation of communion. And it is a relation of communion not only with God, but that communion is, I call it the existential Trinity. The communion with God, the communion with your neighbor, indeed your enemy, and the communion with your deepest nature is one, is whole. And if you shatter any of them, you shatter all of them. So we are in our tradition not worshipers of power. We are the ones that come in the liturgy, in our prayer and contemplation. We seek to come into the presence, to the gift of the Holy Spirit, of the lover of the world. And we seek to be that love in the world. And we become that to the degree that we draw near, to the degree that we are in communion with God. Or put another way, every time there is mercy and compassion and love and forgiveness, and every time we seek to restore the wholeness of life, to mend the rents in life, every time we do that, that is communion. That is the communion we have with the lover of the world. God is present in that. That is the presence of the kingdom.